You know, it's long days. I was up early in the morning before school to get chores done, go to school, come back, chores get done at 8:30, 9 o'clock. I didn't do my homework. And not an excuse, but I got behind. And so I was not the best student, and school was hard for me. So my senior year, week before graduation, I get called down to the principal's office, Mr. Healy. And he tells me I'm not going to get my diploma that weekend because I'd failed too many classes. I wasn't like totally surprised, but a week before I'd gone down to see the recruiter at the Marine Corps because I really wanted to serve. My father, what he went through, you know, and it's a prisoner of war, and what my mom went through when he was missing in action. And Vietnam at the time was really escalating. And at the time I thought, you know, this small little country is being taken over by the communists. We need to free them up. So I really believed, hey, I knew I'd go over there. I wanted to enlist to serve. And so the recruiter said I was going to turn 18 shortly after that school year. And he said, turn 18, we can get you in. I said, okay, I'm signing up. So I told Mr. Healy, I said, well, I've enlisted in the Marine Corps. Next day, he brings me back down to his office, and he said, you did enlist in the Marine Corps? I said, yes, sir. He said, all right, be here for graduation, you'll get your diploma. Now, I'm not proud of that. Shortly after I enlisted, I was in Vietnam. Then I began to understand some of the things my father faced, because I'd often see him at the end of the day, sitting on the lawn before we go into the house on a hay bale. He smoked, having a cigarette. And, you know, as a young boy, I was 6, 7, 8 years old, I'd be sitting there and I'd be talking to him. And sometimes he would never respond, and I'd look at him, and he was just staring out into, you know, the stars, and he didn't even hear what I had to say. I didn't understand what was going through his mind at that time. You know, I really had no idea. And sometimes at nighttime, I hear this yelling and screaming down in my mom and dad's bedroom. And we were always told, you know, you don't come into mom and dad's bedroom when we're in. I went down a couple of times and opened the door up, and his arms were just, you know, in the air, and he was yelling, and he was still sleeping, but I didn't know at the time, but I understand later when I was in Vietnam, he was reliving a lot of the horrors he went through. You know, he
was in World War II?
World War II, he was captured, and they had him listed as missing in action for almost 6 months. My mother was getting letters from him quite, you know, as frequently as they could, write and send them. And on the envelope of the letter he wrote, November 28th, she wrote on there, this is the letter your father wrote the day before he was captured. So he was captured on November 29th. So all of a sudden there was a void in getting any mail. But they're in combat, so you know, you just believe, hey, you don't know when you're going to get mail or how often. So she hadn't heard from him, and on December 20th, right before Christmas, she got a telegram, and it was from the War Department. it's the Pentagon now, but and it just basically said that Staff Sergeant Donald Peter Weber was missing in action. Missing in action, you're 98% a casualty. But my mom was a deep Christian, deep faith, prayed often, always. And in fact, I carry this rosary. It's hers.
Was your mom's?
It was my mom's. And she prayed it at least once a day and sometimes more often. And I got that from her before she passed. And it's with me constantly. It's always with me. But she prayed and prayed. And on November, I think it was November the 6th, she got word that he was a prisoner of war. So all the way from the end of November to early April, he was listed as missing in action. But she prayed and she believed he wasn't, and learned he was a prisoner of war. And my father didn't talk much about it. I mean, I'd have to try to pull things from him. And some of the things, the ugliness of the war, first of all, is nothing worse, but being captured in a concentration camp. And he said prisoners were dying pretty much daily. Starvation, sleep deprivation, torture. He was under 100 pounds, 90-some pounds. He decides, I'm gonna die here, or I'll die trying to escape. At least I'm trying. And I can't imagine the courage it had to take to try to escape, not knowing really where you are, no weapon, being weak, no food. But he had the strength and the courage to try at least, and he did. And he said, like, for 3 days and nights, he said, I was tired and weak, I just kept on the move. Came upon an old barn. He went inside, there was a haystack. And he said, I went and crawled in there to sleep. And he woke up. They had caught up to him. They had the barn surrounded. He believed when he walked out, it was going to be the end for him. But they didn't kill him. Went back to prison, was tortured a lot, And so for him to survive, to get through all that, I wouldn't be here. I was a point man. I wanted to walk point. I wanted to be responsible. Spotting booby traps, sniper, ambushes. I wanted to be responsible to make sure my men weren't let into that. And I always walk point. You come into a village, and I thought we were poor farmers, poor. I learned we weren't. I got over there. Bamboo huts, dirt floors, no electricity. It's so sad. It's just, there aren't words that can explain, because it's, a lot of the physical wounds heal. When I was wounded, my right leg, it's healed. But the ugliness of that war is always there, and it never leaves you, I believe when World War II ended, I think the world looked upon this country and, said, hey, thank you, because we freed up so many other nations and individuals. But Vietnam, it ends up being a political war. I mean, all the lives that were lost, you know, it should have never happened. And that hurts as much as anything, you know. But you got to go on. Most of the Marines, honestly, that I served next to never got to come back and say goodbye to their loved ones. You know, up in Cantillon, we got overrun. You know, why did I not die that night? When most of my Marines, we were right there on the front line, our foxholes died. Why didn't I? You know, and that was time and time again. So I'm blessed.
He didn't talk about the war with me. It took him years. Once in a while, he'd slip up and he'd say something about what happened on an ambush or something, and you know, then he would go quiet. And it wasn't until after he reconnected with some of the Marines that he really became more expressive and vocal about his experiences, which is good for him because his PTSD is very obvious. Living with him and sleeping in the same bed with him, I know what he goes through. And it hasn't been to the point where it scares me. I just worry about him because he carries so much guilt. The guilt is like eating him up. To this day, he feels guilty because he's alive and he's here.
I understand what PTSD is. And, you know, 22 or more veterans on average are taking their life every day. Most of them have been in combat. That never leaves you. Like I said, the physical scars, a lot of them heal, but that war, and, you know, to live with that, the loneliness, be alone. It's sad, and it's hard to explain when you're in combat and what you see and what you go through. You know, you can go see a psychiatrist, but even then it's hard. You try to tell them. Talking to another veteran who's been there, you understand each other. But it's really, truly sad to see how many of them, and their families. It's not only the men and women who serve, it's their families and how they all sacrifice. And I learned, you know, how precious life really is. Each hour, each day, you know, you get the most out of it. And at the end of the day, you want to have peace of mind. Did I make a difference? It's not about material things. Yes, we work hard, we earn things, but that doesn't really bring fulfillment into your life. And that's temporary, you know, and I believe in the end, what goes with you is what you've given back. And everything I have is a gift. I look at it that way. My life is a gift. In 2004, I got run over. I was in Washington, D.C., had a meeting, came out of that meeting, the Hubert H. Humphrey building. It's right on Independence Avenue. And it was about 5:15, and at 7 o'clock, I was supposed to meet a colonel, worked at the Pentagon, for dinner. So I wanted to get back to the hotel I was staying at, get myself ready for that dinner meeting, and waving for a cab, and one pulls next to the curb across. And Independence Avenue, 6 lanes, 3 going one way, 3 the other. So I waited, intersection, and light turned red, and when car stopped, so I start walking it through, and I get into the 3rd lane, and I'm making sure the traffic come the other way, and it was a young lady, and you know, at the time she was 28, and she had a Ford Explorer, and she had her grandmother with her, and she's talking to her grandmother and never even slowed down. She was going about 40, and it was like slow motion. I had, you know, a cell phone in one hand, a little briefcase, and And I mean, it happened quickly, but it was like slow motion. And I'm flying through the air and everything flew out of my hands. I can remember this, and I put my arms around my head and my back hits the windshield. I flew into the windshield. She hit her brakes and I bounce off the hood and I'm laying on the pavement and I'm in the fetal position. I'm laying on my left side and all I could do was move my fingers. And it's just traffic's all gnarled up, horns blowing, people. And like I said, I believe in God. I asked God at that moment, I said, would you allow me to live long enough to spend 1 hour with my family? That's all that mattered. Nothing else, material things, none of that mattered. But here I am. My pelvis was broken 4 places. I was all busted up. You know, to me, that was another message. And I'm in the George Washington University Hospital. You can't move. I mean, you can't even hardly take a breath because it hurts so much. Police officer, like the second or third day, I can't move or anything. He came up, he was doing his report, and he said he was going over, and that's where I learned it was a young lady, who hit me, and he said, I'm going over to finish up the report, going to see her. And I said, please tell her, in a few months, I'm gonna send her a photograph of me running the track. Because it was an accident.
Yeah.
She didn't do it intentionally. Several days later, nurse brings a phone and holds up and says, there's a call here for her. It was that young lady. And she was crying. And I wanted him to tell her that because I didn't want her the anxiety to have to live with that, because it was an accident, And I just told her, we had a nice conversation, and I'm sure she remembers every bit of it, like I do. But you know what? There was a reason for it, and here I am today. So I'm saying, why? Hopefully to make a difference.
I really didn't understand the essence of being a Marine, but that's just how he is. And I knew, that's why I married him. It really was hard for him to move back here after he lost everything. It was hard for both of us, but he's very humble. He's a very humble person. And his desire to succeed is like, he could sell anything. I mean, it's just in his personality to want to succeed.
The night that my father passed away, a few days before, he had a blood clot, so he was in the hospital. Dissolved it, and the next morning, this was like 4 or 5 days later, he was going to go home. I stopped to see him after I left my office that evening, and and asked him. I said, "Hey, you're going home tomorrow, Dad?" And he said, "Yep." And he said, "I'm looking forward to getting home." And he says, "Anything you want?" And he said he loved to drink tomato juice or V8 juice. He said, "Could you get me a tomato juice or a V8?" So I went down to the commissary in the hospital and got him a can of that and took it up to him, and he was drinking that. And I said, "Dad, see you tomorrow. Going home." I lived about 15 minutes from where the hospital was, and just got home, and my mom called. She says, "Your dad, the hospital just called. He's not doing well." He said, "You're closer. Anybody, if you get down there now, I'll be down as soon as I can." She had a drive away. So, geez, I go back there, and he's sitting on the edge of his bed, kind of looking down, and I go, Dad, are you okay?" He looked up and he threw his arms back on the bed, just went back. I went over and I could tell he's dying. He's dying. I grabbed him, trying to hold him. And they say the last thing is your hearing. I whispered in his ear, "Dad, I love you. And you know, because he never said it, even though we knew he did, how come I couldn't have ever said it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I believe he heard me. So now, my family, anytime I leave, I hang up the phone, I love you, I love you. You never know. My father was born in 1919. This bar was commissioned to be built by a carpenter for a brewery here in La Crosse, Wisconsin in 1919. And 1920s, when they finished it, the Prohibition came in, so they never took possession of it. So it ended up in a small community 25, 30 miles from here called Coon Valley, in a little bar there. Well, my father, where our farm was not that far from this little community. So in the wintertime, to make another $40, $50 a week, he would cut logs up in the bluffs here. Hard work, a chainsaw. And then on Fridays, the logging company, the lumber company, was in this little community called Coon Valley. He'd go down and cash his check for $60, $70, $40, whatever, at this bar. So he would go down there on Fridays, and over time, you know, he'd been there. I remember him saying I could get a tap beer for 5 cents. So over the years, you know, my father spent time in front of this bar, and Roxy and I got married and go to Coon Valley and go to the bar and the restaurant down there. And when we built the restaurant and the bar here, knowing the history of my father, the same year he was born, that this was built, where he'd been, what he'd been through as a prisoner of war, missing in action, went and asked the owners if they would sell it to us. And didn't know, but for the right price, yes, they sold it. And so I had a contractor take it out. It was in hundreds of pieces. I remember walking in and I'm thinking, it'll never get put back like it was. But you know what? It did, very much so. So all of what my dad went through and all this, you know, my mom and dad, but my dad in the war and captured and missing in action and all the, you know, the struggles they had, you know, I thought, I come down here, have myself a drink, I have a challenging day, I sit here and I look at that bar and I go, not even close to what my father went through. Not even close. And I'm hoping that, and I believe my dad's up there and he looks down and he goes, hey, my son and our family, grandkids still come in and see this bar that I sat in front of. Means so much, so much.
Everybody said he's not going to make anything of himself. He's a loser. And then when he decided to go in the Marine Corps, he actually got his diploma. And you know what? He never turned back. He was a great Marine. He's a great fighter, but he has a soul that is like so connected.
I just am so blessed. I look at every day as a gift. I really do. I try to live it for the gift it is, even those challenging days, you know, because it's temporary. It really is. I mean, whether you're 20, 50, 100, each day it goes by is one day less. At the end of the day, yes, we work hard. You earn things, but you want to have peace of mind. You want to have peace of mind. Am I living on purpose? You know, my friends, some of my friends live in the park. And I go down, take food and things, and spend some time with them. And they'll say, you know, Don, if I don't wake up tomorrow morning, I'm okay with that. Because, see, they have no purpose to live. They just exist. And our purpose, to me, we're here, I believe, to touch the lives of others in a positive way. You know, and that might mean a handshake, a hug, how are you, whatever, you know. And with all the anxiety and depression and loneliness, that goes a long way sometimes.
Sure does.
So important, just to take the time to do it. And it doesn't have to be someone you know, someone walking down the street or whatever. And so, you know, live your purpose in life.